what this is something that I'd really recommend you to take to heart, is that when you first start modeling, really give a good, or if you're still modeling, if you're already modeling, just give a good thought to what shape the object is that you're trying to make, and not in terms of what kind of weird woobity goobity shape it is, but actually what if I draw an outline around the object, what outline do I get? And you'll find that for most objects in the real world that humans made, is mostly cubes. Everything that nature produces is mostly cylinders. Trees, plants, hills are of course not cylinders, but everything that has to do with that. Now, say a tank engine that you have to use only a cube as a starting object to make everything else, because that would of course be ridiculous. You would be wasting a lot of time and resources turning this into an engine, except rather than just using a bunch of other shapes. For example, say I'm going to make a very basic V8 engine here, which I'm do right now is by going into edit mode right here. Now, like I said in the beginning, I'll not really be focusing on the techniques, or I'm not going to be focusing on how to use Blender itself, because there are a lot of good tutorials on YouTube on the basics of Blender itself, and then it takes time and patience to learn this. I cannot show you how to use Blender from 0 to 100 in one session. What I can show you is what is important in the process and the workflow you're going to follow. So, like I said, I just turned into edit mode to edit my mesh into greater detail. I'm going to scale this on the axis. Now, if you've done maths in geometry, you've probably also done maths in axes, in the different 3D lines that we follow in the 3D world. For example, graphs use 2D lines, and you use up and to the side. Now here it's basically the same system, but of course since it's a three-dimensional world, you have an extra axis that goes in depth. So if we looked at it from this perspective, this would be a 2D object. You would have a line going this way, you have a line going this way. It's two-dimensional. But of course, we're making 3D models, so it's three-dimensional. You have an extra line going into the depth of the object. Now, if you've done maths into more detail, with this format and technique, you will know that the axes used are mostly the Y, Z, and X axis. Now, the weird part about Blender is that it uses a weird configuration. I know that for a lot of programs, the Y-axis is the axis that goes up and down, and the Z-axis is the one that goes back and forth. But in Blender, it's the other way around. It's the Z-axis is the one that goes up and down. So what I just did is I pressed G to move. G, like this. And if I press G and then I press Z, you can move up or down. The same system applies with the other axis. So if I press G and I do X, you can see left or right. X is always red, Y is always green, Z is always blue. So I'm going to say that again. Red is X, green is Y, and blue, we can't see that one right now, but I don't know why. I've never had that one active, but you can also see it right here. Z is blue up and down, Y is basically going this direction, depends on what angle you're working at. And then X is the red one going this direction. So this is also very important while you're working out, because if you're working with this a lot, you'll eventually just find yourself doing it automatically. I found that a lot of beginner Blender users tend to use the buttons here, but more advanced users also use their keyboard for many things. I personally use my keyboard for everything because it's just really fast. It's programmed into my hands: S, Y, S, X, and S is of course scale. For a lot of the actions in this program and in other programs, the first letter of the action is usually the shortcut on your keyboard. So S is scale. Now I know G doesn't stand for move, but I don't know why they decided to do that. But as you can see, if I press M, you get a merge tab, M, merge, S, scale, R, rotate, and and etc. etc. Now, I wanted to still talk about geometry in this one because I said that you don't have to actually you don't have to use a single object to make one mesh. You can use multiple. So if I were to make a V8 engine, I just make a bunch of cylinders like this. So I go to add mesh cylinder. You can also do right here add mesh cylinder. Now, if you're using other 3D programs, then of course this is going to be different. But for Blender, it's most of the things you're going to be using while making your model or mesh are these shortcuts here, which after a bit of training into your hands, you'll get to know them quite well. So I'm going to rotate this a little bit, scale it, move it up. There we are. Now here, if I want to make a V8 of course has 4 cylinders on either side. I could do 2 things. I could duplicate this. Duplication is with, you would imagine it with a D key, but the D key in Blender doesn't stand for anything on its own. So if I use Shift D, I duplicate, or copy, as you could also call it, I copy my mesh. Now the problem is, of course, when you press Shift D, is that you kind of have this in your hands. If you want to place it manually, you could do so, but I'd not advise it if you want to make something uniform. So what you could do is you press Shift D, I click, and I just do G to move, X, and then I just put it somewhere here. And I do the same thing here. It's a little bit big, so I'm going to do select all of them. It's basically like any other drawing program or program where you can select things. Holding Shift is allowing you to select multiple things. So if I click one, Shift, as you can see, these are dark orange and this is light orange. Light orange also stands for the object you've selected last, and dark orange stands for the object you have selected thus far. You can also see them in the collection tab over here. You have the multiple objects you have the collection or the folder as where the objects are in, and you have all of these. So if I now just press S to scale, you can see it will scale along basically what it will detect as the center mass of the mesh itself. If you have one mesh with a bunch of geometry and one mesh with very little geometry, it will select the mesh with the highest geometry as, or it will put the cursor for the point at which it will scale somewhere in the middle of there, because it will just take a bunch of stuff and calculate where the center of mass is. You can change this in some of the menus, for example here, but I'd be going too much back and forth in details that I don't know if you could all remember. So yep, now I have basically a V8 engine, but it's only on one side. So how do I get this here without having to do a bunch of rotational work? And you can do that with the mirror function. So if I now select my meshes again, so I'm clicking one, holding Shift, click, click, click. I have now all of these 4 selected, and I would like to join these meshes together as one mesh. Now, what's the first letter of join? It's J. If I just press J alone, again, nothing happens. For a bunch of the functions in this on your keyboard, pressing them on their own will not do much. I don't know exactly why they did it, but it's just the way they did it. So in order to join these 2 together, you would not press Shift J like you would do with, for example, duplicate. You would press Control. It's weird, but it's you get it figured out after a while. So if I hold Control J, as you can see, they are now one mesh. So let me just do that one more time. Holding Control J. Mirror this object. Now, the problem is right now is if I were to mirror this object as it is, it would not go here. The reason being if you look at this little yellow or orange dot here, who's doing the mic? What? If I decided to do anything with this, it would take this point here as the point at which it should do stuff at. So by just rotating this, as you can see, it's using that point as a guide. That's the guide. It's using that it's the hinge basically for the rotation. If I were to press scale, it would scale at that particular point. It will just use this as a guidance, but it will also use this as a guidance to where it will mirror or put its information at. So if we wanted to mirror this to this side, what would you want to do? If we look at this little cube or staircase thing, you can see that now the orange object has moved to this location, which is the center mass of the cube. Now, what I want you to do for a sec is I'm going to visualize this, but just think about the logical course of action here. You have the cylinders here, your origin point is here. You wanted to mirror these to be on the exact position of this cube on the other side. How would you want to get that done? Well, I'm gonna show you. It is basically by you have to imagine cutting this thing in half. So let's do it like this. What I'm gonna be doing now is I'm gonna create another set of edges, which is lines. These are edges. I know it's not edging, it's edges. So what you want to be doing is create another line set of lines here. Hold on. There's a guy on my roof. One sec. You want to be creating a bunch of edges along this side to mirror this object. So I'm going to be slicing this thing in half practically by creating those lines. And how you do it is holding Control and I'm pressing R. And this is basically called create a loop cut. This function is called create loop cuts. The loop cut function is kind of weird because of course Control R doesn't really stand for loop cuts anyway, but I think Blender just kind of put a bunch of shortcuts in different buttons, even though they didn't make sense. The loop cuts function is very handy if you want to make extra geometry or extra lines or vertices to work within your object. You can keep it at 1, but if you hold your scroll wheel, as you can see, you can increase or decrease the amount of loop cuts you want to create. And if you move to different locations, you can see it also shows you where you can create different loop cuts on the geometry. Like this. But of course, since we're going to be slicing this thing in half vertically, we want to be creating vertical loop cuts. So I'm going to decrease this again to about 1. And I'm going to left click. And as you can see, it now knows that I'm creating 1 loop cut, but I can still move it around. How do we position this in the middle without knowing that it's never actually going to be in the perfect middle? Well, Blender has actually thought about this, and if you press the right mouse button, it will put the loop cut in the center of your selection, in the center of where you originally put it at. So I'm going to do that one more time. If we want to create a line across this, in the middle of this, I'm going to be creating a loop cut, which is the shortcut for shortcut for loop cut is Control R, as in Control Rodney. You then move your cursor to the correct location, which will visualize for you the appropriate lookup. Once you've hovered over there, you left click, and then you right click, and then it positions gives you the correct position for which you have selected in the first place, which is the middle. Now, what I'm going to be doing now is cutting half of this off to give us a better example of why mirroring is what we're trying to do. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go into edit mode again. I have mine selected for tab. If you press tab, you can see you're going to be switching between edit mode and object mode. Object mode is the raw information that your mesh has, and it's basically like Lego. It's like, how do I say? Instead of selecting the individual Lego pieces that you have in your box, you're just selecting the boxes in which Lego pieces are in. If that gives you guys any idea of what I'm talking about. So if you press tab while you're in this mode, you press tab, you go into edit mode. And if you press tab, you go back into object mode. I'm going to be pressing tab again. And to go through the skeletal see-through mode that I prefer to use most of the time, you just press Z, and Z brings up the shading mode of your viewport. But if you don't want to use the shortcuts, you can just go to these four little spheres here. As you can see right now, we're standing on the full white sphere. This is the object mode. If I press this one, we'd be going to the wireframe mode. Wireframe. This is a frame made up of a bunch of wires. So that's pretty straightforward. The other two I'm going to be exploring later for texturing purposes. So for now, we're just going to use this one, object mode, and wireframe mode. Or like I said previously, if you want to do it a little bit faster, you can just press Z, and then you can hover and you just move your mouse to the desired mode. I know this is solid. Most people call it object mode. I call it object mode as well. Technically, it's called solid mode, but yeah. So let's go to wireframe, and if you are in wireframe mode, you can now select individual vertices or edges or faces. I think if you've done maths before, you've probably also had this before, taught to you as well. What you can select faces, edges, vertices. So what we want to be doing, I personally always like to use vertices for this particular task. I'm just gonna select these vertices like this, and then to press delete. You can press delete. Personally, I always press X. In a lot of drawing programs, I believe Photoshop has that one as well. If you press X, you can delete the objects that you have selected, or in this case, the vertices, because we don't have an object selected right now. So I'm going to press, for the convenience, I'm going to press delete, and then it brings up this little menu here in which you can see what action you want to take. So I'm just going to be pressing vertices because I have those selected. So as you can see right now, we also have an open mesh, but we have half of the engine. So if you look at if we go back to the origin point here, you can see that the origin point here is still on the cylinder, on the far left cylinder, and on this one, it's in the correct spot. We want to be using this as our guide. The fastest way to do this, if you already have one object that has the correct origin, is just to simply select the object that has the wrong origin first. Press the object that has the right origin first if you want to mirror them both, obviously. And then just doing the join function, which is of course Control J. And as you can see now, the origin is in the correct position, and we have one mesh. What you can do now depends on kind of what your style is. I know some people that use the mathematical style of mirroring. I also know people that use the modifiers for this, because guess what? There's another whole section of functions that we have not yet explored. While I'm doing this, also please remember that most 3D engines have these features as well. I know I'm using Blender to demonstrate this, but if you go to 3ds Max, if you go to Maya, if you go to even SketchUp, most of those have mirror functions, rotate functions, scale functions, deleting geometry functions. That's all the same stuff. If you know what function you want to do, it makes the job much easier, even if you're in a different 3D engine on itself. So I'm just going to do the quickest way that I know how to mirror, which is duplication, scaling, and then scaling on a negative number. I know that sounds weird, but I'm just going to walk you through it. So if I now do the duplicate option, which is of course Shift D, I just left click to keep it in its position. I didn't move my mouse. I think you can also use, you can also use your right mouse button again so it doesn't move. As you can see in the collection, we now have two objects that are identical and in the same location. But because our origin point is now correct, if we perform the mirror function, it should work. So I set scaling on a negative number. On your keyboard, there are of course a bunch of numbers on the top of your keyboard and on the left, the right side of your keyboard. Either of those could be used to scale an object according to a certain number. So if you knew I was making an object and then I had to scale it down 3 times, or scale it up 3 times, what you could do is press S, and I press 3, and I press, S, 3, left click. And as you can see, we now have an object that's 3 times the size of this object. But instead of doing a positive number, you can do a negative number. What that results in will be the following. So if I now press S, and if you go to the top of your keyboard, next to the 0 key, there will be a minus key. If I press the minus key, and then press 3, it does weird shit. Sorry, one sec. S minus 3. This is actually a good problem because this will happen sometimes, and it's better to know how to fix it than to be left with your shoes outside of your feet. What is happening right now? I'm scaling on a negative axis, and as you can see, it is scaling on a negative axis, but it's scaling, it's rotating the object, and it's also making it bigger, which is not what we want. We want it to be smaller. And it's also rotating in a weird way because it should not go this direction, it should stay here, making it smaller here. The reason for this is simple. We have just performed a bunch of rotation and scaling on these cylinders here. And the data of that rotation is still in the cylinders. The location rotation values of these cylinders has not gone lost, despite us having merged the meshes. It's still there. So what we need to do is eliminate that data and make fresh new data based on the cube that we have. So how we can do that is we can go to Object, and then we can go to Transform. Actually, hold up. No, that's not the right key. Sorry. Oh yeah, because I always use the shortcuts for this. I'm gonna say it again to make sure that you guys remember. Objects hold math values, and not just in like ones and zeros. They hold values in their rotation, their scale, and their location. If you merge things together, that data does not get lost, which can result in this problem where the mesh now thinks it's doing the right thing, even though it's not doing the right thing according to us. We want it to just become smaller and on its own location, not change rotation and location. So in order to remove this, you need to bring up a menu that is a bunch of features. I still don't actually know the name of the menu itself, I just know it exists. And it can be accessed by pressing Ctrl-A. A is of course the first letter of apply. It's the apply menu. But it's also the menu that's related to the data that's now inside of your mesh. So what we want to be doing now is, as you can see, there's the data for location, rotation, and scale. These are the data that I just explained. Now, why would these be just sitting here? It's because with this function, you can apply the data you have on or you can apply the new data that you just gave to the mesh itself. The mesh currently does not know that it is in the position. It doesn't know that the changes that that have been made to it are meant to be this. So what we want to be doing is telling the mesh, okay, this is your new home, this is your new rotation, this is your new scale. Stay here. Don't do anything else. You can, as you can see here, you can do multiple things. You can make sure it only knows that the scale is changed, the rotation, or the location. Now, in this case, it doesn't matter. We just want all data to be applied. So what we're going to do is we're going to select all transforms. Click. And now all data of the cylinders and the cube should now be applied to the new mesh. So if we now do the exact same trick again, so we press S -3, why does it do that? That's not meant to happen. That is weird. This is very typical. This thing's never happened to me, and of course now because I'm streaming to an audience, it does happen. Let me try that again. Apply properties, rotation, scale, location. Yep. That should all work. I don't know why it doesn't work. But luckily for us, there is another function we can use to mirror this. That should work, considering that I just applied everything. And it's going into modifiers. Modifiers in itself, as they know, they can change the they can change the properties of your mesh according to your own will, with a lot of the various options and things. A lot of these modifiers I cannot explain right now because they go into very deep detail. What I can explain to you right now is the function of the mirror modifier itself. So you'll see you have a tab on your right side of your screen, unless you change to the left side, with a bunch of these icons. So world icon, a tool icon, a 3-pointed triangle that's green. I'm going to go to the little wrench. As you can see, it's an empty space, so we're going to click Add Modifier. And then if we go to, let's go to the search bar, and we just type in mirror, you can see it pops up. Here we have the mirror modifier. Now, something weird is going on, of course, because we have to change the axis of the mirror itself. You can mirror something on x-axis, y-axis, z-axis. It's a three-dimensional object, and it allows you to select that particular mirror. So I'm going to be testing this, and as you can see, as soon as I change to another axis, we now have the V8 engine.